Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm really excited to be here today and to introduce this really interesting and amazing panel. I'm Lorraine Charles. I'm the Executive Director and co-founder of NAMO and one of the co-hosts of this Migration Summit. Welcome to the end of week 3. Wow, we've done it. The Migration Summit 2022, organized by MIT Refugee Action Hub, REACT, NAMO, Karam Foundation, Paper Airplanes, and the MIT Abdul Latif Jameel World Education Lab, JWEL, is a month-long global convening designed to build bridges between diverse communities of displaced workers, universities, companies, non-profits and NGOs, social enterprises, foundations, philanthropists, research policymakers, employers, and governments around key challenges and opportunities for refugee and migrant communities. This year, we're exploring the theme of education and workforce development and displacement through virtual events hosted by participating partners around the world. Today, our panel is very interesting. Perhaps we'll have a very evocative title, Decolonizing. What's the title? Decolonizing English Language Teaching and Learning, Accepting Diverse Englishes. What does this mean and why are we doing this? So in this panel, we seek to understand how the English language can be taught in a way that separates North American and British cultural values from teaching and learning. How can the English language be taught in a way that is appropriate for refugee learners without the linguistic imperialism that is common in English language teaching, while respecting and celebrating the native languages and cultures of our refugee learners? We have an amazing panel, but first I want to introduce to you our fantastic moderator, Dr. Hanan Khalifa, who's a Director of Education, Transformation and Impact at Cambridge Assessment for English. She's an award-winning international expert in learning, teaching and assessment. Her current work interest is the impact of reform initiatives, sustainability and learning, and assessing Arabic as a first language. Welcome, Hanan, and thank you so much for doing this for us. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Lorraine, and thank you for putting together such a fabulous panel of speakers. Really hats off to you. I just want to say something else about myself. My very first job was an English language teacher at British Council, Alexandria in Egypt. So I totally understand about decolonizing English. I can tell you lots of anecdotes, but I would like to move on to welcome our guests, Omar and Mohammad, who are graduates of the Paper Airplanes program. And also, if we can move on to other speakers as well, they can introduce themselves, who they are, where they're from, and about their organization. So if I can just start first by Omar, and then we're moving to Mohammad.
Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to be with you. As an English program student and graduated from Paper Airplanes last year, really I can say it was an amazing opportunity, and it was a proactive opportunity for me because I gained a job offer according to my English language improvement, and also in 2017, and also in 2019, fortunately, I started the enrollment in a master program in English language as a student in political science and international relations. To be honest, it was after improving my English language. As I came from Syria to Turkey, my English language, it was very, very bad. And I explained for Christina, my conversation was, hello, I am Omar Garebo only. After that, my face moved to be red, and I cannot complete the conversation or anything. I started from 2016 with my tutor, several tutors, and they are my friends on social media, on Facebook and Skype, and we each time we are communicating and asking about ourselves and about our update or news. really, it was, I cannot describe my my grateful for paper airplanes and this opportunity to prove my English language firstly. Secondly, the first goal was to communicate with the people from the other part of the world, because we still are under the dictatorship regime, and we have not or we had not an opportunity to communicate with other peoples in other world. Now, fortunately, thanks to God, we have an opportunity to communicate with others freely, without any limitation or restrictions or any fear from the regime, and it is a tool. English language, I think it is a gate for us as Middle East people, or for students in general, to enter a new world, to enter new universities, new, let me say, job offers or opportunities in general. So really, it is very, very.
Omar, sorry, I need to stop you there.
Yeah.
I'm sure there, I mean, people can also contact you on the chat, but I need to move on to Mohammed. Mohammed, please tell us who you are, your wonderful news, and your experience and challenges learning English, and how that has impacted your opportunities. Noor?
Okay. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Mohammed Noor. I'm Paper Airplanes English program graduate. I actually graduated about maybe a year ago. I first started with Paper Airplanes in 2020 in the fall semester. And since then, you know, my goal was to improve like my English speaking and writing, especially. I was willing to, you know, pursue like an education abroad. So I needed like to really improve my English, you know, to help me the application process. And actually, I really believe, you know, my English has improved significantly from then. And also about this, you know, speaking about our topic today about decolonizing, I believe I have some experience here, since my tutor, he was from Korea and he was a migrant to the United States. And actually, you know, it was, you know, faced the same struggles, you know, in learning English, maybe English related to some American culture. He introduced me to how he dealt with it, some kind of books or maybe series you could maybe watch to maybe to understand the American culture more and more. I think it really helped me through this my English journey. Also, you know, coming about my main goal, which was like pursuing education online. Last year, I took a gap year after graduating from high school and started working on my application. And I believe like my tutors really they helped me with like maybe some reviewing some essays, and even like connecting me to some people from their network related to some schools I applied to. And yeah, eventually I got in both, you know, several schools at United States, and which main one MIT, which is the one I'm going to study this fall. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity in terms of improving English. I think my goals succeeding at getting into a top school, and even more like networking and having a lot of friends. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and congratulations, Noor. Wonderful experiences. I must go to Christina, because you're very closely related to, not family related, but to the success of Noor and Omar. Could you please introduce yourself and where you work and about your organization?
Hi, everyone. So I'm Christina, I'm Managing Director at Paper Airplanes. And I just want to thank you all for the chance to speak today. I'll do my best to represent our curriculum design team. Want to say thanks to Kate, Maxine, and Stephanie, and our interns for making the curriculum possible. Paper Airplanes has had an English language program since 2014, so for quite a while now. And we assist conflict-affected individuals from around the world by pairing them with a volunteer tutor and providing them with a CFR-aligned curriculum. So we offer one-on-one and speaking classes formats. Our students go on to gain admission to universities and receive job offers, just like you've heard from Omar and Nour. And we decolonize English language teaching and learning by encouraging a cultural exchange between students and tutors, but also through discussing grammar. And I think this is an important point to mention. Like, besides discussing the more tangible cultural elements like national dishes and holidays, we allude to the more intangible element, how languages express ownership and often colonization through their grammar. Like, for example, in English, we consider water to be a non-count noun, something that we can't easily use up or exhaust. But in other languages, it's seen as a countable noun, something that is to be conserved and protected rather than being subject to exploitation. So we aim to understand and respect these grammatical differences.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you very much. If I may go now to Mary, over to you. Mary Ritter.
Okay. Can you see and hear me?
Yes.
Did you know that of the 1.7 million limited English proficient New Yorkers, less than 2% were able to access state-funded ESOL classes? My name is Mary Ritter. I'm from the Collaborative for New Immigrant Education at NYU, which offers tuition-free advanced level English language courses to asylees, asylum seekers, and resettled refugees in New York City. This is our structure. We are a faculty-driven initiative. Oh, it won't advance. Anyway, we're a faculty-driven initiative, and we're housed within the English Language Institute inside the NYU School of Professional Studies. We're a cross-school collaboration with the Silver School of Social Work and a community. We have a community collaboration with RIF Asylum Support, and we follow a community collaborative approach. So we have our community collaborative committee. Yes, and when we set out to create this model, we wanted to make sure that we worked with communities instead of on behalf of or for communities. So we offer advanced tuition-free ESOL classes. We also have a research component. We have this cross-school collaboration and work with community leaders, and we offer support services. These are some of the things that we do, of which one of the most important is that our students are supported by Masters of Social Work students at the NYU School of Social Work. We also connect them to legal resources at NYU. So this is what our class looks like. This is why we do it. And this is what our community collaborative committee looks like, composed a lot of our former students. And that's my spiel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And for those of you who may not have or may not know, Mary Ritter is an assistant professor at the NYU School of Professional Studies English Language Institute. Now I'm going to go to Mykhaylo from DuoLingo. Mykhaylo, over to you.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Mykhaylo Zakryzhevskyy. I'm a curriculum designer at DuoLingo. And today here, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. Such a pleasure to be here. But I'd like to talk a little bit about DuoLingo. And so many of you may know DuoLingo, but if you're not quite as familiar, DuoLingo is the world's most downloaded education app. At DuoLingo, we're committed to making language learning, first of all, free. That way, making it accessible to different populations. and also fun and effective because we do a lot of research testing our platform, making sure that our courses are actually effective and helping people learn languages effectively. We create a range of language products that are built around bite-sized lessons. So it's easy to get language practice that way. You can fit a lesson into your busy schedule. If you're on a bus, 5 minutes, enough to get you going. So specifically for English, we have courses. We have 23 English courses for speakers of other languages. So for example, I'm currently, as a curriculum designer at DuoLingo, working on an English course for speakers of French and also for speakers of Russian. And I heard Christina earlier mentioned CFR, a national standard for English language. And so at DuoLingo, one of our goals right now is to also align our courses to the CFR standards. And so the courses that I'm currently working on are getting CFR aligned. And actually, this is kind of an interesting point that I'd like to make. So for example, the English from Russian course, or English for speakers of Russian, that I'm currently working on to get it CFR aligned and also improved in terms of context and delightfulness in terms of the sentences that we're using as bite-sized learning pieces. That course is currently, my mom is taking that course. And so for me, it's kind of like this honor, I'm developing this course, and she is currently in Ukraine, so affected by conflict, not a refugee status yet, but she's from the part of Ukraine where a lot of people are speaking Russian. So it's like an additional honor to be kind of working on something that's so meaningful, but also realizing that there's stories like that around the world where English is someone's gateway, kind of to Omar's point earlier, it's a gateway. It's kind of an opportunity to get different new experiences and get a better life in many cases. And so DuoLingo in that case is kind of a tool to enter that gate, because it is free and available to everyone who has a smartphone. And, it's kind of a good opportunity to brush up not only on your English, but also on other languages, depending on your situation.
Hello, thank you very much. I need to stop you here. Your mom will be very proud of you when she hears this. So I would highly recommend that you share the recording with her. I'm moving on to Miki. Miki, if you'd like to come on and introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Anan. Thanks to the MIT Migration Summit for putting this panel together and for everyone who's here with us. My name is Miki. I manage the English program for Mosaik Education. So at Mosaik, we provide dialogue-driven English language courses for university-age refugee youth in the Middle East. We primarily work in Jordan and Lebanon. English is a crucial barrier to higher education for refugees, and we found that communicative approaches were lacking in the region. So while there is English language provision, much of it with the students that we were working with was teacher-centric or Western-centric, with examples primarily from the US and the UK that students couldn't necessarily relate to. So we run courses that we call DOGME, which leverage student experiences and interests. So students learn from the materials that they bring into the classroom. For example, our first cohort was primarily refugees from Somalia and Sudan. So someone would bring a news article from Somalia, and that's what the material that the students would learn from in that class. And today our classes are run by teachers who are refugees themselves and students of our first cohort.
Thank you very much, Miki. And over to Aline. Aline?
Yes, thank you, Hanan. Marhaba to all the Arabic speakers, and hello, bonjour, since we're talking about decolonizing English, throwing in a few other languages. My name is Aline. I'm the co-founder of Nitacallam, which means we speak in Arabic. And quick note about myself, I'm Lebanese, born and raised in New York. And Nitacallam is a social enterprise that was born out of Lebanon and the Syrian refugee crisis in Lebanon. And language was actually more of a way to provide Syrians in Lebanon with access to an income. The concept was that because Syrians in Lebanon are still not allowed to really get employed and work in the Lebanese local economy. The idea was to hire them through the digital economy to teach their language and to teach their story. So it started focused on Syrian and Levantine Arabic with an English-speaking audience, mostly targeting journalists, humanitarians, people focused in the international and development spheres. And so since starting in 2015, we've expanded. So Nitacallam offers Arabic in 7 different dialects with refugees from across the region, but also host communities, for example, Lebanese. We also added Persian with Iranian and Afghan refugees, teaching Dari and Farsi. Then we went to Latin America in light of the Venezuelan crisis and the situation with Central Americans, launching Spanish, then French with Francophone African refugees. And thereafter, we actually did a bit of Armenian and Kurdish with mostly Middle Eastern refugees. And just this past 2 months, we did mobilize to launch Ukrainian and Russian classes taught by Ukrainian refugees and IDPs, but also Russians who are displaced due to voicing dissent in their homeland. So Nitacallam leverages language and the digital economy with the ultimate goal of actually providing a livelihood to displaced persons. Within this conversation we're having, language is critical, but also access to resources, access to information, mental health support, and of course, financial support is critical. What is interesting, especially in light of this discussion we're having, which is really fascinating, and when Lorraine invited me to speak, I wasn't sure at first that we fit in directly, but of course, the interesting side of what we're doing is we're kind of upending this idea and of we have to always teach the refugees, we have to teach them English. And a very funny small anecdote is that multiple times when I've presented Nitacallam, people are confused and they think that it is someone else who's teaching refugees English. So that's very, very often been an interesting experience. I would also share that in light of everything we've said, and I see a lot of parallels with different organizations, Mosaik, with paper airplanes, of course, that we know very well. We were working with your predecessor, Christina, a couple of years ago. But we also saw, as kind of Mohammed Noor explained, this bond he had with his tutor, who was also an immigrant, right? That we saw that we could also find Syrians who spoke great English or Venezuelans who spoke great English, who can teach to other refugees from their communities who don't speak English. And that creates a really nice connection and the examples are more relevant and there's just an affinity. So that's another program we've been experimenting at Nitacallam. So English taught by refugees for refugees. And I'd also mentioned that we do hire refugees for translation work, and we partner a lot with schools and universities. NYU is one of them, so that if you're studying Arabic, for example, at NYU, you can actually use Nitacallam sessions as a complement, as a language lab. So it really creates, first of all, it creates bridges. It's a voice for refugees to share their story. It's a way to practice with native speakers. And we're very excited that with Nitacallam, our tutors and translators have earned over $1.5 million in self-earned revenue. So I will stop there, and thank you for the panel and the invitation.
Thank you, Aline. Wonderful news, and I will be having a request from the panel and from the audience towards the very end of this panel. Can I remind our audience and our participants to please post your questions in the chat. We're moving now to a few questions from me to the panelists. So, English, as we all know, has many varieties, and the literature has gone back and forth on which variety should be taught and learned. So, what are your views? Which do we accept or not accept? And if you can put your hand up, then I will take, so any takers for my questions? Right, it's to you guys, to the panelists, not to the participants. Oh, okay, Christina, sorry, haven't seen, yeah, thank you.
So I'll make an attempt that I hope the other panelists can build off here. I've noticed that our sector in education development and teaching English is so fragmented by nature, and it probably will continue to be. So there are so many versions of English available for both academic purposes and preparing to apply to work opportunities. I think we'll continue to see that. So it just depends on the student's intent. I think all of us need to encourage our students to be crystal clear about what they want to get out of the program to make sure it's the right fit from the beginning. And then if we happen to be that right fit for them, that's great. If not, we have a lot of like-minded partners here who could serve different purposes.
Thank you. Would anyone like to add what Christina? Yeah, Miki?
Yeah, I can build off of that. So yeah, I don't necessarily believe if any single variety should be taught, but in the context of refugee education, I guess, as Christina mentioned, tying it to goals, whether it's for achieving higher education or wanting to speak English with your children's teachers at school, and eventually just the practice of English language learning evolving to become more related to the human experience and learning in a meaningful way that's kind of similar to how we or why we choose to emphasize dialogue in these pedagogies rather than a didactic kind of textbook driven model.
Thank you, Miki. Mary?
Yes, I wanted to say that I think teachers often rely on their instincts, which sometimes serves well, but it's so useful and surprising to ask the community of learners what it is that they need. When we set out to offer free English classes to limited English proficient New Yorkers, I think we assumed that the most need would be to those who were least proficient. And what we found was that actually there were a lot of services for those with very limited English proficiency. And as people got more and more proficient, those services started to disappear. And so we were quite surprised to find that we could be most helpful actually at the highest levels of English that would really help bridge that the gap that students felt they had between their English and what they think of as professional English. So we had to listen and and respond to that, and it surprised us.
It's actually it's quite surprising, because I would have thought that you would have more demands for the lower CFR levels rather than the higher levels. So I don't know if you're joining a factory line, for whatever factory line, all that you need to know is the difference, not all, but you need to be able to know the difference between refuse and reject, yeah? Otherwise, it will be quite chaotic, but that's really good to hear. So yeah, levels are going up. I'm gonna go to another question. So, and this is to all of the panel members, so please feel free to jump in. From your perspective, where do you see the future of English language teaching and learning? The last 2 years was quite, gave us opportunities, were very interesting. We have been seeing conflicts, we have been seeing displaced communities for quite some time, not just recently, but at least since the Arab Spring. That has been quite continuous for various reasons. So where do you see it? Where do you see the future of English language teaching and learning? And maybe Mihailo, I'm going to start with you, because I was fascinated by the fact that the app is the most downloadable app of DuoLingo. So maybe DuoLingo is the future. So tell us.
Thank you so much, Hanan. Yes, so I was kind of thinking back to the previous question almost also, and I just wanted to briefly say to that point that, yes, I think I agree with the panelists that it all goes back to the goal that learners have, and but it's about building this solid foundation of the language learning and teaching, and that gives learners more confidence to proceed and make those choices on their own. But I think part of the future of English language and teaching is the further panels like this and summits like this that talk about decolonizing, English and focusing more on the learner versus this big, massive sort of machine of one variety of English or a different variety, but shifting it back to the learner who needs it most, and so I think that's part of our future. We're going to continue talking about that. We're going to continue talking about how fluency, is kind of is a myth. It should all be about progress that the learner is making. We should help learners understand that based on their goals and needs, their personal progress is what matters most versus a specific kind of fluency defined by, a sort of a textbook or a certain community. If they are effective in whatever they're doing, then that's their success. And in terms of DuoLingo specifically and the future of English teaching and learning, the role of technology, of course, is going to continue to grow. Technology is kind of a tool for learners and teachers also to help make learning more individualized. For example, individualized feedback is something that we're working on a lot, making sure that point of time feedback is very effective for learners to understand where they need to correct their mistake or where they should be going. And we're also working on a tool that kind of takes that further, so personalizing learning, not only in terms of feedback, but also in terms of the level of difficulty. So we have this tool called VerBrain that specifically works on that, as identifies your progress, and again, not fluency, right, but your progress that you've made, and also gives you the right amount of challenge that you need within a lesson. And so I think AI is going to continue, this importance of AI and support of technology. Technology is not going to take place of teachers, no, but it is going to become more and more important in helping learners to get that individualized feedback that they can't, for example, get in a classroom with one teacher and 30 students. Teachers, of course, help students with a lot of other things like contextualizing learning and so on and so forth. But in terms of individualized feedback and just about perfect level of challenge, that's something that technology can do.
Very interesting, Mihailo. And if another panel member would like to answer the question, I noticed there are questions coming in, so I'm in the chat, so I'm going to ask the question that came in a bit later. Is anyone would like to add to the future of learning?
To piggyback on what was just said, my impression is that yes, we're definitely moving in more and more technology enhanced directions. I think one of the effects that seems to be happening is that it's bringing down the price, of English language learning, which is great for accessibility. And there are many apps now that will connect an English language learner to an English language speaker, not necessarily an English language teacher, but to a speaker. And that is one way of I guess, taking down the walls of the English language teaching profession and opening that up and making it more accessible, with the unfortunate byproduct that if you are a teacher of English, you're seeing your field open up in a way that introduces more competition.
Okay. Miki or Christina or Aline, would you like to add, or I can provide also my own perspective? But
I'll just jump in to add that, yeah, I think that technology is always, there's the good and the bad, right? And so we might be, I think that we have to tread carefully and navigate carefully, because, yeah, I think that technologization, if I may say, of language learning can also mean a slightly altered and lack of depth in the language learning. I think, just we can't replace human learning. And to me, language learning is a way to bridge a culture and to go towards peace. And as someone who works in the kind of peace and war and human rights department or space, when I thought of the idea of Nitacallam, because I was thinking Syrians need access to an income, but it was also when I was thinking of all the times I've tutored French and I've tutored English, and I had an incredible relationship with my students because this one-on-one dynamic creates a really unique bond. And for me, a big part of what Nitacallam is not just the language learning, it's the friendship, it's the stories, it's humanizing the other. And so, I would say that as we move towards the future, as we move towards technology, let's also remember that, right? And how can we preserve that? And how can we also, preserve this livelihood for people who are linguists and teachers, right? And translators, right? Because as we go into automation, what does that mean, right? For Nitacallam, who found a way to make refugees who lost everything get an income and get a restored sense of dignity and purpose, it's great to see the tools that people can, someone else can just sign up and learn a language through technology, but that removes the livelihood from those individuals. So I think, and both have their benefits, right? So I think it's just something to really be aware of and keep in mind as we evolved. And I would just say also the truth is, English is the dominant language. It's the language of business. I mean, I'm currently based in France, and just fascinating to see how English is getting much more, present here. And in the business world, French, you really need to speak English also. So it is interesting. And there comes to a point where it's like I feel like we need to also accept that that's how it is, but how can we make English still be there, but also all the other languages, lift those up? Those are just a few thoughts.
Thank you, Aline. I'm going to move to the questions in the chat. I would like to add my own personal perspective as well. Personalized learning and real-time adaptable feedback is definitely much needed. And it will lead to improvement. I mean, that is something that is, I think, is very, very innovative. The real-time part of effective feedback and the adaptability, the AI while DuoLingo is doing that. The human element of a teacher, the mentor, the coach, the parent, the guardian, and these are all various hats of the teacher. I don't believe that will go away. So if there are teachers who are hearing us, personally, I don't think that will go away. However, technology, it's about what is best fit. So the best fit, if I don't have access to human teachers, I will use technology. If I have access to human teachers, and I might sort of like look into my use of technology, I also would really urge you to read a book that is called Stand Out of My Light. And Stand Out of My Light came from Dionysius, who's a Greek philosopher who was quite a rebel. And I don't know if Mykhaylo knows the story or not, but as a rebel, he decided, he came from a very wealthy family, but he decided that he will live on the streets, eat and drink and do everything that he wants on the street. Alexander the Great was passing by, and Alexander the Great looked at him, didn't know who he is, and he asked him, "Tell me what you want. Tell me what you need. I am Alexander the Great. I will give it to you." And what did the Greek philosopher say? Stand out of my light. Because Alexander was distracting him from sunning himself, And this is what I keep telling my kids about sitting with us, eating dinner or lunch, and on their, I don't know, Snapchat, on Instagram, and my kids are 22 years old, I still tell them off. So anyway, I'm gonna stop here And I'm going to go to one of the very first questions that came in, and I believe it was to you, Aline.
About professional development?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, what sort of, so Melissa asked what sort of professional development or peer support networks are available for the tutors with Nitacallam?
Thank you for this question, Melissa. So let me just share that the original concept of Nitacallam is it's grounded in a market-based solution with the idea that over 10 million Syrians were displaced from their homes. And within that population are millions of highly educated individuals, middle-class communities who come from, backgrounds in medicine, engineering, teaching, etc. And in the immediate, the concept for Nitacallam was to leverage their existing talent, to also salvage this human capital that was at risk of being wasted and lost if they're deprived from an income, from a future, from access to resettlement, etc. So when we launched Nitacallam, we actually had access to Syrians who were very educated, who actually had already a teaching background. And rather than go about doing professional development, which is actually a little bit more along the lines of what NGOs do, because Nitacallam is not an NGO, we're a social enterprise. Our solution is grounded in market needs, the demand and supply. So there was a demand and a need for these individuals to access an income and to have a platform for their talent because they were robbed from a future. So that's how Nitacallam came to life, with this idea that they're ready and they're equipped and they can teach. And on the other end, there were, hundreds of learners who are fascinated by the Middle East, studying the region, want to support Syrians in a much more sustainable way than just aid, right? So this is Nitacallam's approach originally. Now, as we evolved, as we shifted to other populations, to other refugee communities, and of course, when we use the word refugee, it's really not a monolithic refugees are not a monolithic entity, right? There's all kinds of profiles, all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of situations they find themselves in. The Syrians we work with who are based in Beirut are very different than the Syrians who are based in Brazil, etc. So with time, as we grew, as Nitacallam built itself as a social enterprise, because we did not go for investment, we're still a very small kind of a mom and pop organization, we actually brought in other types of professional development and community support to our tutors. So there is a training that our Arabic tutors go through in partnership with the head of the Arabic department at Cornell, where they are actually trained to teach a very specific curriculum that blends formal modern standard Arabic with the Levantine dialect of Arabic. With Spanish, we're currently working with the ILO to provide training for our Spanish tutors, and that follows a curriculum. With French, we're also in discussions with l'Alliance Française. But the origin, because Nitacallam is small, because Nitacallam is really, we're a startup mindset. So you go with what's needed and what you have available at first. And then we worked with NGOs who have budgets specifically for training. One really interesting example of actually the complementarity of what Nitacallam does with an NGO. Recoded, many of you might know Recoded. They originally started out of Iraq and they did coding training for refugees. So many of those refugees actually did the trainings and then they weren't actually able to always sustain themselves during the training and they needed financial support. So they were actually trained with also English training, basic English training, basic, tech savviness, et cetera. And then they connected with Nitacallam and they were able to leverage that training to then work as tutors with Nitacallam. And so they were getting training to become coders. And at the same time, they were getting financial income that helped sustain them and actually be able to take the training. Because there were some examples of students who really were sleeping through their classes because they were working a very local job in Iraq and were poorly paid. So it's really interesting, to find the different puzzle pieces to really bring holistic support to the populations that we're trying to help and serve. And one thing, however, that Nitacallam really...
Sorry, I have to stop you there because there are lots of other questions. Yeah.
Sure.
No problem. Very much. Another question from the audience. I think it's Asmi or Asami. I apologize for my pronunciation. I would love, thank you so much for this talk. I would love to hear what the panel thinks about English certification industry through two lenses. Lens one, how language teachers are pressured to get a costly CELTA qualifications ranging between $1,500 to $2,700 by Cambridge Assessment English by employers that require it. Number two, how learners are pressured to take TOEFL or again, Cambridge Advanced exams to prove their English competency, which I know DuoLingo is tackling with their certification program. How do you think we can improve the situation so that employers are more accepting of other ways to demonstrate proficiency? Panelists, I'm Cambridge declaring conflict of interest here. So over to you, please.
I just quickly wanted to address the second part about TOEFL and Cambridge Advanced exam. That portion of the question, just wanted to mention that, for example, at DuoLingo, we offer the DuoLingo English test, or DT, for English proficiency certification, which costs a fraction of the cost of competitors and can be taken also at your own home or on your computer without having to wait for months and travel to distant testing centers, because we do recognize that learners in many different disadvantaged situations, especially if they're in the refugee status, that's one of the issues, is the traveling portion and the component, the financial component. So that's exactly what we're trying to work on with DET. And so that helps with that situation, is just alternatives for English certification for learners.
Thank you. Christina, please, and then Mary.
Besides this point of cost, and I agree with you, everything you just said about DuoLingo becoming more popular and being certified here. I think we're also pushing our learners in that direction, because many of them can't afford the cost of the traditional exams here. But time and time again, we've also seen the issue of students just not being able to register for the typical exams because their ID is expired. Because they're refugees, they can't obtain a national ID or a passport. Because they can't travel back home to do so. It's either dangerous or costly to make the trip. So that's a key issue that these traditional exams need to solve, and I hope the industry works on it.
Or the universities, right? It's often universities that ask for TOEFL. We worked on a solution for a while, which was that the English Language Institute faculty did a communicative competency exam, a spoken exam via Zoom with all the prospective students coming into the School of Professional Studies at NYU. And we thought that this worked marvelously. And then once the school started fully considering how much it cost them, they moved to other means. So.
Yeah, and if I may add, just to set the record straight, Cambridge does not set the price at all, because that will be against laws and regulations and monopoly and all of that. Whoever sets the price is the institution that is using the qualifications. There are various reasons why institutions use a Cambridge or an ETS or a DuoLingo, and it varies from being a trusted quality, wanting the big name, and it really varies across the spectrum. We tend to say to people, it is horses for courses, yeah? So what is really critical to have an internationally standardized exam that will allow mobility from one country to the other in very specific high stakes, like for example, our medical English exam. So if a doctor gets it wrong, yeah, then we have death, completely. So if you do not take that level of granularity, then that is really leading to crisis. Right, moving on to a question that I think I was going to ask, but it was also asked by the audience here, and it is about the idea of the native English speaker. I mean, it's a fallacy, but people still I want an English native speaker to teach my kids. I want a Mr. John rather than Ali, Mr. Ali, and I want Mrs. Mary rather than Mrs. Hanan, yeah, because of this perception of native English and of perception about accent as well. What do you guys think? And Miki?
Yeah, I think Aline spoke to this really well when she was talking about her observation of many people not understanding or being surprised that refugees are teaching refugees. And as I mentioned earlier at Mosaik, we have our teachers are refugees themselves, and also still learning English on their own, obviously at a different level than their students. But I think sort of changing what's normal and changing where that source of knowledge is coming from is a step in that direction, especially both in addressing the design of our programs, but also leaning into kind of the ecosystem of learning that's come up, both with peer learning, this digital learning ecosystem that's evolved. We've found many of our peers and students or peers teaching peers on WhatsApp groups or on Facebook Messenger. And that sort of shifts this mindset to a growth mindset of peers learning from peers rather than this fixed mindset of learning from this native speaker, omniscient expert who might not necessarily even be, even if they are sort of a more quote unquote native speaker, like the best to kind of teach the pedagogy themselves.
Thank you. Right, anyone else would like to add? Okay.
Christina has her hand up.
Oh, sorry, Christina.
Since I just contributed, I'll keep it brief just to add to Miki's point. I think most of the organizations here, we have non-native speakers who are teaching English, which is fabulous. And really the onus is also on the public education system. We need to advocate more to them to teach etymology, because English is composed of words that come from other languages, 80 or 90% of the language, I think. I'm not an expert here, but something like that, it's quite high. So we need to push advocacy for etymology for public education and in our organizations.
Great, thank you. Right, and a question. In many socially disadvantaged contexts, I'm not just talking like refugees and conflicts, I mean, really socioeconomically disadvantaged contexts, speaking English is a commodity. Yeah, food comes first. How can you guys help? And I'm talking about people living in shacks, not having water. Yeah, so over to you.
Well, I think first we can see what we can do about the tuition. So making it free or on a sliding scale. And I've also, just because this is the first time that I've worked in this kind of context, I've also seen the influence of having these wraparound services, like treating the student not just as an English language student, but as a whole human being who has maybe housing needs or needs for transportation or mental health needs, needs for community because they feel isolated, like treating the student as a whole being. It's been revelatory, you know, how much difference that can make when you give learners more support.
Thank you, Mary. I've noticed a question from Dimitri. He says, as the world moves away from biased and colonizing standardized tests like GREs and SATs, SATs, I wonder if the panel can talk about ways to move away from current standard tests, all tests, including DuoLingo and ours as well, Mykhaylo. Are there other mechanisms to measure proficiency that are, oh, I missed it. There must be, sorry.
That are more like portfolios than forcing teaching to the test. Is that the end?
Yeah. Thank you. What do you guys think? What, our dear panelists, what do you think? Maybe I can share our own experience in Cambridge. So during the pandemic, and it's not really about English, it was more about the IGCSE, which is like the SATs, and because it was always face-to-face, and because it's highly secure exams, and we're aware of fairness issues and lots of stuff about malpractice, we were faced with needing to make a decision that the tests have to go on. So what do we do? And this is where we started looking into teachers' estimates. Some countries around the world welcomed the use of teachers' estimates throughout the year. They would have given online testing, online tutoring, etc. And other parts of the world wrote us complaints. How could you even think about this? Yeah, because they themselves, I think it might be country specific. They say, well, one parent wrote, I know for a fact that the rest of my daughter's class take private tutoring with the teacher of the class. So the teacher may give them better. Yeah. So there was this lack of trust between the teacher and that particular parent. So honestly, like we thought that, okay, teachers' estimates is the way to go. Yeah. I'm going to go back to the issue about horses for courses. Yeah. Do we really need to test throughout the year? So I know, for example, that the Emirates are thinking about, we are doing over testing. Yeah. Egypt have done the same. There are lots of over testing. Yeah. Why don't we stop? I mean, what does it have to be like that? Does it have to be across all subjects or across core subjects that we assess? So there are different ways to ensure what to assess, when to assess, and to ensure the fairness and the security of it. And I'm going to stop here. And I know we're just at 2 o'clock. So if anybody, please, Lorraine, if you allow us 1 more minute, yeah, because we started 2 minutes late. If anyone else from the panel would like to respond to Dimitri's question, please.
Thank you, Nour. Yes, well, please. Thank you.
Actually, from my experience, I would think like, maybe canceling this kind of standardized test might be like against the interest of like maybe us, the refugees or students from the conflict zones. I'm speaking from my experience, like, in canceling, the requirements of SATs, they're required more from like, communicating from the school, from principal, from counselor. And this is the thing that we don't really have. So we are struggling with like, are getting things from our schools, from principal, from teachers. But, when it comes to like doing a test in general, we could study for a test, we could study on our own. It could be a little bit hard to get this test, paid for or go to the testing center. But at the end of the day, it all depends on, on our studying, on our efforts, right? But when it comes to like, the structure of a school, maybe in the US, this could be done. But for international, for like, conflict zones, the school, this, I think, could work against our interests. So I would think like, those standardized tests, like, for me, I've taken the SATs, TOEFL, DuoLingo, and I think, they made me stand out more, like, or just applying with like my Syrian national high school diploma, right? So I think, you know, it has could work both ways, but this is from my experience.
Thank you.
Wow.
Lorraine?
Wow. Someone just said we wish this talk was 2 hours. When I planned it, I thought, oh, 1 hour. Can we fill 1 hour? This was a fascinating, incredible conversation. I wish we had more time. We do have our Discord channel where I invite you to post questions. We want to continue this conversation because we feel that this is such an important topic of English. And Nour, that is an amazing point you made, that yes, we, you know, I think from a Western perspective, we're rebelling against standardized tests. But you're right. If you come from a place where the portfolio may not be as recognized, then you need these tests to make you stand out. And this is and we have this problem with refugee credentials being recognized, not just English language, but sort of university degrees and all qualifications of refugees get in their home countries. So a really good point to end on. Thank you so much. Thank you, panel. I hope you all connect, because I think Hanan has interesting things she wants to talk about. Hanan, I invite you to email everyone. And the audience, thank you for these fascinating questions.
Yeah, great.
We will have part 2 of this next year at the summit. Thank you. We invite you to attend our other sessions. Thank you. Ramadan Kareem. See you all soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Bye-bye.